actually do a whole lot on stream and stuff the last few weeks. I've been fairly busy and people got me to play Magic again. So I started, dabbling with some older decks, starting to piece together another deck. And I got to looking at the Tyranids again because all of the Warhammer decks that I had bought and started to play back when they came out, the big thing that I had with them is that I didn't want to put in cards that didn't feel like they fit in the deck. And then the other thing was like I didn't want to put in I try to keep everything foil, but not all these cards have foil. But basically, I ran into a few cards that seemed kind of interesting for a Tyranid deck. So right here, you know that the Tyranids have blue in their color scheme. So there's some cards like this Archmage Ascension, which at first I thought, maybe this is something useful because it's at the beginning of your end step. If you drew two or more cards this turn, you may put a quest counter on it, and then if it has six or more quest counters, you can basically, instead of drawing, search out any card in your deck, which seems pretty strong, but I don't think the Tyranids are going to be able to get this out, so we kind of scrapped that idea, and then we're going to go and look at some of these cards that I was kind of looking at for a few decks. As you can see, this stuff gets pretty expensive. I think Call of the Wild was one of them, so let me look at that real quick. Um, I don't think this was it, but basically, if I mean, you could put that in there, pay four, put any creature that's there into play, but I don't think it would work for the Tyranids. Drop Deck and Black Blade out of that. So we got Distant Melody is another one that seems like it could potentially work. Now, I get that the artwork on some of these are different creatures, and they say this are fairies in this picture, but there's a couple of different artworks. But what I want you to look at with the artwork is basically that these aren't creatures, these are sorceries. So in this case, these would be creatures that like the Tyranids are going to feed on, and that's where they're getting their power bonuses. So that's how I'm working this into the deck structure is that these sorceries and these spells are being able to show races that the Tyranids are going to take over and consume into biomass. All right. So distant melody, you see it's just a picture with some fairies, but they kind of look like just humans. Choose a creature type, draw a card for each permanent you control of that type. So this isn't super amazing, but potentially, depending on what creature you actually have in the Tyranid deck, I think this could work. And the way I'm kind of trying to make this into a better version of the Tyranid deck is because instead of slotting in random creatures that don't really fit the theme, um, if we take out all of the random creatures that aren't really like major Tyranid player cards and replace them with more card draw, then we're more likely to run into those big player cards and get them out quicker. So this right here could give us potentially a lot of card draw, potentially not. So kind of 50-50. And they got Ever Watching Threshold. So this is an enchantment. So this is what I'm looking more into is in the enchantments. So if we look at the flavor text of this card, it's you think they know we are here. All right, and that's just the Goblin Raider. All right, so it's some sort of portal, potentially could be warp energy that the Tyranids are using. Um, but whenever an opponent attacks you or a planeswalker you control with one or more creatures, you draw a card. Not the best, but it is still a form of card draw. Probably not going to be the best thing in the world for the Tyranid deck, but it's another thing that we kind of looked at here. So next thing we got is Genesis, or not Genesis Wave, I don't think. I think it's Kindred Discovery was the next one. Essentially, we're finding some cheat cards that gives us like card draw and stuff. So Kindred Discovery, this is like some random creatures discovering something at the bottom of the ocean. There's a couple of different things that you a couple of arts that you can use, and few things are truly lost at sea. So we don't really know what this thing is. But as Kindred Discovery enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, which would be Tyranid. Whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, you draw a card. And this is where we're getting more into the flavor of the Tyranids. This fits in really well with the Tyranids. So I think this card in particular would be pretty good in the deck. It's an enchantment. The Tyranid deck also didn't have very much graveyard recovery. So there's not a whole lot. Like once you kind of kill off the Tyranids, they're kind of done for. So enchantments are probably going to be a little bit easier to keep safe than your creatures, because if you put things in that give a bunch of creature effects and they die, we're not going to be able to get them back. So at least we can kind of split things up with the enchantments. But this is just card draw. But it's enters or attacks, which I think is very good. I think Return of the Wild Speaker was one. That's the other thing that we're kind of doing. Instead of having Gene Stealers in the deck, instead of having Gene Stealers in the deck, we're going to be using instants and sorceries and enchantments and stuff to replace them for the most part. So Return of the Wild Speaker is a 5-drop. Choose one. Draw a card equal to the greatest amount among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creature you control gets 3/3 until end of turn. So these are both useful effects, but for 5 mana, you're going to be able to draw quite a few cards. So for instance, Swarmlord's ability, just his first cast, he's a 7/7. So you're at least going to be able to get 7 cards off of this, which will refill your hand pretty well for the most part. And this is basically just, what I would consider a Gene Stiller getting, reabsorbed into the hive. It says the curse is broken. Wouldn't say this is like the craziest thing in the world. Um, Strionic Resignator and Lithoform Engine, I don't know if I would want in the Tyranid deck, because I don't know if it triggers. Like if I summon the commander and he gets 2/1/1 counters, can I trigger and double up those counters? But I think Strionic Resignator and a Lithoform Engine are two cards that I like putting in a lot of my decks because they're very versatile. And I usually have a lot of things that I like putting in that. So then we have Triumph of Ferocity. So this is a 3, so green and 2. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card if you control the creature with the greatest power or tied for the greatest power. So something like this, I think, is kind of a Tyranid flavor text card. The picture isn't really perfect, but rid me of this curse or die with me, Garuk Wildspeaker. So you could just say that maybe he got turned into a gene stealer, or he got, he's being controlled by the Tyranids or something. And this card maybe kind of like make it fit in more with the deck, or maybe they're just two people that the Tyranids come across and consume. But essentially, as long as we have the strongest creature on the field, which that's kind of the game plan of the deck, we should be able to draw a card. So we get more card draw, more lands, more mana, and be able to get to those other big creatures quickly. And I think with this, we're wanting to kind of swing with our creatures as much as possible, very fast, and get through our stuff quicker than our enemies. I think Vigor was also one here. Or yeah, I think Vigor was one. Vigor I'm on the fence about. It's a creature card. Oh, they have a different card art for it. So there's a Fallout card. That's way better. So Elemental Incarnation, it gets Trample. If damage would be dealt to another creature you control, prevent that damage. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature for each 1 damage prevented this way. So, and when it's put into the graveyard, you can put it into your owner's library. So you're always going to have access to this, so you're always going to have something that can attack. And this picture here actually looks really good. But essentially, this is just every time you attack in with your Tyranids, if they get blocked or whatever, you're just going to be able to put a ton of 1/1 counters on them. So make your boys really big, really quick. All right. One thing, Foundation. I think Greater Good might have been one. I don't remember. So sack a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power, then discard 3 cards. You could use this on the Tyranids. It kind of looks like a Tyranidish card, like you're sacking creatures, but I don't think we want to sack creatures necessarily with the Tyranids unless we have to. I mean, we're drawing cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power, and we could always sack our commander. So our commander would come in as a 7/7, and we could sack it and then draw 7 cards, discard 3, so you get 4 cards, and then you could resummon the commander as a 9/9 and keep doing that. So you could still use this for something that could just boost your commander ridiculous amounts as long as you have the mana for it. Um, it's also a way to like get rid of things, like if you're, they enchant your creatures or something, you could just sack them and get rid of them. So maybe like if your creature's going to die anyway, you could just go ahead and sack it and get card draw off of it. So pretty strong card draw effect, I think, for this deck, for the most part. Not too shabby. Alright, then we got Primal Empathy. So this is a 1 green blue. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card if you control a creature with the greatest power among creatures on the battlefield. Otherwise, put a 1/1 counter on a creature you control. So, we get the 1/1 counters, we get the the card draw. It's kind of doing both. Um and this is Primal Empathy, so I would just say that this is a occultist or whatever that's helping the Tyranids out. So, they're trying to buddy up with the Tyranids. Kind of fits decently. There's a lithoform engine. Alright, so then we got reconnaissance mission. Mission. So there's a few different card arts of this, but it kind of looks Tyranidish. Um, the Bonders work with creatures that fly, slink, and burrow, assumingly they know everything. So, enchantment. When a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. So this gives us multiple card draws if if we get a creature that hits, if we get multiples that hit, we get more and more card draw. So basically, the more card draw, we're churning through the deck and we're trying to run people over quickly. Since we don't have access to more Tyranid cards, it's probably the best bet that we got is just to get through the deck as quickly as possible and get those big hitters out. Maybe we need like a resurrection card in here. We can kind of look at that at some point. So reconnaissance mission seems pretty decent. Druid's Respiratory, I think, was for the Necro deck. I think we already had Triumph the Ferocity. Right for the Hunts. Yeah, we already had Triumph the Ferocity, so let's just go down here. Get rid of that. Necro Girl known killer, I'm not 100% sure on yet. I think all those were Necro deck. Overwhelming Stampede, I think, is one of the cards. So there's a couple different artworks with this. One of them is just like humans, and the other one is creatures. So how I would say this is, first off, it's 5, so 2 green and 3. Till end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get XX, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So with this, with their commander, it's at least going to be 7/7 for everything. So that could be pretty decent. And when you go Overwhelming Stampede, you could basically say that these guys are running away from the Tyranid forces, essentially, is what you could do. So that would be the card art, maybe. But yeah, I'm assuming this is probably for the Necromancer deck because I'm making a Necro deck with the Heir to the Black Blade as like a sub commander, so I can pull him out and use his massive combat stats to like run over people's boards with buffs like this. Um, okay, but decent card. It could work in the Tyranid deck. Genesis, improvised Great Worm. So we got Ristic Study. There's a couple different artworks for Ristic Study, but enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays one. Not super flavorful for the Tyranids, but you could basically say that they're studying their opponent, so they watch their opponent draw cards, and if the opponent isn't taking the necessary steps to keep them from learning, then they're going to learn what they do, and then figure out how to beat it by drawing cards. So I think that would be the flavor text I'd use for it. But I think that's also a fairly expensive card. So yeah, that one's pretty expensive. Um, Probably save that for later. All right, so we got Garruk Uprising. Believe there's a couple of artworks for this as well, so I would prefer to use. There's a different artwork that has Garruk going sideways with an axe, and in the background it looks like tyranids, but it's dinosaurs. But basically, this is 3. When enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with 4 or greater power, draw a card. Creatures you control gain trample. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So we know that we're going to be able to get at least one draw card off of this for 3, and we get trample, and we're probably going to get an additional draw or 2 draws or 3 draws off this, depending. And if we have enough 1/1 counters, it's going to be even bigger depending on what happens. So I think this is potentially a good card. Get the other artwork that has him pointing sideways, though, because it looks more Tyranid. Then we got Unbound Flourishing. I don't think there's a different artwork for Unbound Flourishing. As far as I know, there isn't. So this is also a 3-drop. Whenever you cast a permanent spell with a mana cost that contains X, double the value of X. And this is an enchantment. And then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell or activate an ability, if that spell's mana cost or that ability's activation cost contains X, copy that spell or ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. So if you cast an instant or sorcery spell or activate an ability, we probably won't really have those in the deck. Um, Unless we have some sort of buff power thing. And I know that there's like a mutation. There's like Savage Mutation or something that's a green card that it feels very Tyranid, I think, as well. But this right here, I mean, you got a bunch of these snake things like Hydras or something in the background. Um, I think, 13. There's 13 or more creatures that have entered the battlefield with X counters on it, I believe. So you're gonna have a decent chance of getting one of those, and doubling the counters on them isn't really a joke. I mean, it's gonna make them a pretty big threat that has to be dealt with. So I think it's probably a decent card to have in general. Should be pretty good. Think Helix Pinnacle. Good grind, long rest. All right, Rite of Passage was one of them. So if you look at this card, it's another 3-drop enchantment. Whenever a creature you control is dealt damage, put a 1/1 counter on it. So every time that you do a combat or whatever, your creature is going to get multiple 1/1 counters on them. So slowly over time, it's going to build up. But see, every scar is a lesson, every battle a test of what you have learned. And that creature in the background kind of looks like a Tyranid, so kind of fits the Tyranid theme, I think. I think bootleggers. I think Coastal Piracy was one of them. This one's not as flavorful. There's a couple of there's 2 card arts for this, and the other card art looks more Tyranid, I think. But whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. This seems more flavorful, and also it says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage. So I think you can trigger this multiple times. Yeah, one card per creature. So if you're able to get many creatures on the board, you could draw a lot of cards with this. So that could be pretty good. And you could say maybe the Tyranids are, poking around on the coast, trying to find weak points. Maybe that's how you could fit that in. But the other card art looks better. Necrotic Ooze, Endless Dead. I think Rite of Flourishing was one. Okay, so you got Rite of Flourishing is another one. Rites of Flourishing. Okay. So another 3-drop enchantment. Card art kind of looks, Tyranidish. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Each player may play an additional land on each of their turns. Actually, I don't think this was for a different deck. I mean, you could still play it if you wanted to, but you'd be giving your opponents lands. But yeah, that's for a different deck. So let's just avoid that. So Simic Ascendancy. So 2-drop. And you can pay 3, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. And this deck, you can usually get to like 10, 11, 12 mana, so you could do like 3 or 4 counters a turn. Whenever one or more 1/1 counters are put on a creature control, put that many growth counters on Cynic Ascendancy. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Cynic Ascendancy has 20 or more growth counters on it, you win the game. So whenever one or more 1/1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on the ascendancy. Okay, so this is like your mothership. It's your game-ending card. If you can't get through with combat damage, you have to make it to this card and then use a whole bunch of mana and get a whole bunch of counters. There's so many cards in the deck that can give you a bunch of 1/1 counters that I think this right here is going to be a pretty good include to have. And essentially, the way to think about this card is that the Tyranids 1/1 counters are their biomass. So once they get to like 20 biomass, they are kind of unstoppable at that point. And this is going to be your game ender. Um, because also you got to think about whenever one or more 1/1 counters are put onto a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. So if you have your commander, the Swarm Lord, he comes in with 2 1/1 counters at the very beginning. So each time he dies, he gets an additional 2 counters, I believe. So even if you have like 5 deaths on him, you can bring him back, instantly get 10 counters on Simic Ascendancy. So as long as this is on the field and your commander is like in the command zone or around, or you have some way to get 1/1 counters, you could pop this up to 20 very quickly, I believe. So this is a very solid card, I think, for the Tyranids. The next one we had is kind of an iffy card I wasn't sure about, but it's Curse of Predation, which sounds like a Tyranid thing. So, Curse of Predation, enchant a player. Whenever a creature attacks enchanted player, put a 1/1 counter on it. And then hunters feed on the fear of their prey. So, flavorful, I think. I think it fits the Tyranids. The thing I would say is that this isn't really the best card in the world because your opponents can also take advantage of this. But that being said, if your opponents are attacking your enemy with you, then you're going to be killing a player off the board very quickly. And it also means that potentially they could help you weaken their front line so that you can get your creatures through easier. So, kind of an iffy card, but I think it has potential. Because whenever a creature attacks enchanted player, put a 1/1 counter on it. So you can just get 1/1 counters every turn as long as that player is alive. So I think a consideration, but not the best. Then we got Foster. So on this picture, you can see that it kind of looks like these animals are taking care of a tyranid. So you see a little tyranid head right there in the middle. That's kind of what I'm looking at, and all these animals are taking care of it. 4-cost enchantment. Whenever a creature you control dies, you may pay 1. If you do, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So this just lets you, like, whenever your creatures die, you get a, draw a card from your Swarm Lord, and then you get to um, look up and find a creature card immediately with this. So I don't know how good it is or how bad it is, because if it's in play, I think you're doing all right. But you pay 1, you could do this multiple times, and then reveal cards off the top of your library until you reveal a creature card, put it in your hand. So, but everything else goes in your graveyard. So you're going to be losing a lot of your sorceries, your enchantments, all that. It's kind of risky, but you could potentially get your bigger creatures out quicker with this. I think Guardian Project was for the Necro deck. If I recall. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. I mean, you could run this as well. It seems to fit. Yeah, I mean, you could. I think this is for the Necro deck, but the Tyranids could run it. Just extra card draw. I think Family's Favor is the last card that we had. So this is another 3-drop enchantment. Whenever you attack, put a shield counter on target attacking creature until end of turn. It gains whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player. Remove a shield counter from it if you do draw a card. So essentially, whenever we attack, you put a shield counter on a creature. If the creature would die, then the shield counter gets destroyed. But if it doesn't, then you can sack the shield counter and then you get to draw a card. So you get some card draw, you get a little bit of indestructible protection, so pretty decent. And then Family's Favor, I would just consider that like your cultists in a card helping you out. And that's pretty much all the cards that we found so far with that, so hopefully that helped you find some stuff that you think is pretty neat and you're willing to try it out. I just happened to run across some of that stuff and thought it was, lower cost than what everyone else was showing you. I know there's some different cards that I can't find because there's like a mutation card and stuff that's really nice. But y'all guys have a good